The year 1923 saw the opening of the Peel Godred branch line, which runs from Kildane, then travels north to Abbey, and finally the town of Peel Godred. Between Abbey and Kirkmatchin runs another branch line with one station that served a small village called Howan Lake. Located 4 miles east of the village, the station stood next to a crossing that passed over another branch line, which left the main line from Kelsthorpe Road and crossed the branch line next to Howan Lake. The station master at Howan Lake was a man named Richard Byrne, who took great pride in his job, and while his job did make him money, he also had a habit of winning it, which made him somewhat of a penny pincher. Byrne was known to spend his time off at the village pub, where he would frequently gamble money over a game of cards, even once winning £300. However, in October of 1928, Byrne lost a bet to a fogman named Miles Haxton. Haxton demanded Byrne pay him £150 in 3 days, which he promised he would. However, 3 days had gone by, and Haxton told Byrne that if he did not pay him by midnight, there would be consequences. At midnight on the 31st of October, Byrne stayed late at the station to let the last service of the day depart. After the train had left, he was alone on the deserted station platform. It was a moonlit night. There was silence and a thick fog. At that moment, an owl hooted in a nearby tree, and Byrne could hear footsteps coming from behind him. He turned around, and Miles Haxton stood before him. He drew a revolver from his coat and then... Master Richard Byrne saw no more. The next morning, an engine pulled up to the station with his mail train and gasped at the horrible sight in front of him. Byrne was lying dead on the platform. He had been shot through the head and was lying on the platform, still in his suit and eyes wide open. Miles Haxton was soon arrested and was sentenced to death by hanging. After the murder of Richard Byrne, the Abbey to Kirkmatchin branch line closed due to a lack of passengers. But according to legend, whenever an owl hoots, a heavy mist will roll around the old line, and the restless spirit of Richard Byrne roams around the now derelict station. It was October of 1963, and the North Western Railway was undergoing a number of repairs, especially at Vickerstown Yards and on the main line between Kelsthorpe Road and Vickerstown. Henry and Edward were tasked with transporting goods from Brendan Docks to Vickerstown for track repairs. On the evening of October 29th, our story starts, Henry and Edward had just finished their last jobs of the day when the Fat Controller arrived.
Good evening, you lot. Edward, Henry, I'm impressed with your work on the railworks transport. Now, tomorrow night, you both have shifts at Wellsworth. I need one of you to take a goods train to Vickerstown tomorrow, but because of the railworks on the main line, you'll have to take the branch line between Kelsthorpe Road and Vickerstown. Now that line will be restored for reopening, but for now it'll be fine. Any volunteers?
Edward suddenly felt very faint.
I'll do the job, sir.
Okay then, it's your job, Henry. Tomorrow night, 9:45.
And then the Fat Controller went to his car and left for home. Edward had a really uneasy sleep that night and couldn't stop thinking about the line Henry would have to take his train down. Next morning, work ran like clockwork for all the engines as they continued their day-to-day duties, but Edward was still worried. Eventually, night-time came, and Edward and Henry were waiting for their trains. Edward decided to warn Henry about the old line.
Henry, there's something you need to know about the line you're taking your train down.
As Edward told the story of the Howan Lake station, all Henry could feel was skeptic about the topic.
And there's a legend that whenever an owl hoots, a mist rolls in. And when that mist's about, the ghost of Station Master Byrne roams about the station.
Rubbish, Edward. There's no such thing as ghosts.
Regardless, you better take care on the old line, Henry.
Stupid bird.
Henry backed down onto his train and waited as the men completed the final preparations. But Edward's story played on his mind. There was only a few workmen around him, along with a few lines of trucks and coaches in the siding, and despite acting brave, Henry felt a little scared.
Owls, mists, ghosts. Edward's gone soft in the boil. There's no mist.
But Henry was wrong. The fog rolled in thick and fast. Then Henry saw an amber-tinged glow in the distance.
What's that?
It's an amber lamp. That means proceed with caution. Who's there?
No one replied. Henry crept slowly forwards. Presently, he stopped by a tree a short distance from the Howland Lake crossing. It had a sign nailed to it, "Beware of the viaduct." The driver was surprised.
No one warned us about that before. And look, the signal's red and the gates are closed. And there's a fogman's coat. But where's its owner?
Then, to their horror, they saw a light move within the station building.
Ghosts! Edward was right.
Something very strange is happening. I think it's best we go back.
So do I.
And Henry retreated back to Wellsworth. Henry spent the night at Wellsworth. He did not sleep well, however, and when morning came, the mist had cleared, but Henry was still in shock. A workman was talking to Henry's crew about the unsafe viaduct. Well, lucky you didn't cross it last night.
Yes, but we don't know who warned us.
Then Edward stopped by with an engineer's train to mend the line near Crowman's Gate. He could see Henry was rather shaken up.
What happened on the old line last night, Henry?
Henry told Edward about what he had seen last night. Edward was bewildered.
That's disturbing, Henry. But whatever it was, I hope you never have to go back to that station.
That afternoon, Henry's driver spoke to him.
The viaduct is safe. We can take our train back along the old line tonight.
But what about the haunted station?
Henry, I'm pretty sure whatever we saw was not paranormal activity. It was probably just some teenagers messing around in there. Now we must do our job.
But Henry really didn't want to. When dusk came, Henry was at Wellsworth, ready to leave in 2 hours. Just then, the signalman came up with bad news.
The points for the run-along loop are jammed. I'm afraid you're going to have to push your train up the line tonight, Henry.
Well, that's just brilliant.
Henry felt even worse about taking the train, but he hoped he would be spared thanks to the trucks. When nightfall came, Henry was feeling slightly better and sizzling nicely. Suddenly, an owl hooted, and then Gordon thundered by. Oh look, Henry spooked!
Be quiet. I'm not scared.
But Henry was. When they reached the old line, the fog came down. As they approached the same area, they saw the amber light again.
Here we go.
Then, unknown to Henry, the gates mysteriously closed by themselves, and the signal turned red. The trucks had seen everything, and they were spooked too.
Stop! Stop!
The trucks crashed through the gates and raced past the station. A mysterious figure watched Henry go by. Ahead was a landslide blocking the line just in front of the viaduct. Henry braked hard, but the trucks hit some of the rubble and plunged into the ravine. There was silence, then a creaking noise, and then Henry's driver saw a strange sight coming towards them.
What's that?
That's our ghost. It's old Bailey the Fogman.
Bailey McNeil, known to everyone as Old Bailey, came up to them on a handcart. He was very cross.
I tried to warn you about that viaduct. Why didn't you pay attention?
We're sorry we ignored your warnings. Henry and the truck thought they saw a ghost in the abandoned station.
Old Bailey laughed at the driver's comment.
I worked this railway for a long time. I'm a fogman, but I'm also the caretaker of that station. And I assure you, I have never seen any ghostly station masters. I was in the station last night, making sure no hobos were living in it or vandalizing it.
Well, is there anything we can do to thank you?
Well, I'd like to restore and operate that old station. If you let me, I promise I won't spook Henry again.
Henry felt better, knowing Station Master Byrne wasn't haunting the station, and that Old Bailey had saved his life. He was now grateful for that. In a few months, Old Bailey's wish was granted. The station of Harwin Lake was restored, and Old Bailey was appointed as station master at the grand opening.
Well, Henry, I think you were brave enough to come back to the station. I wouldn't have ever come back. But you did, and you learned that there was no ghost.
Thank you, Edward.
Then, the Fat Controller spoke to Old Bailey.
Well, Bailey, you and your station will be really useful. Let's hear a hearty thank you to the friendliest, ghost on the island.
Everyone cheered, especially Henry, who was the happiest of all, knowing that there was no ghost.